So welcome everybody to this third session of the virtual conference for GuideShare UK for the IMS stream. So this presentation is going to be on the final countdown, preparing for the IMS managed ACBs mandate, which as we all know, is coming compulsorily pretty soon from IBM. And this is going to be led by Anshul Agrawal from BMC. So are fine if you do questions during, if you want to ask questions verbally, either unmute yourself or you can actually post it in the chat and then I'll read them out if you like. So it's up to you how you want to do that. Obviously this session is recorded and just bear that in mind. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Anshul. Over to you, Anshul. Cheers.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so welcome everyone to this session where we'll be talking about the final countdown of big thing in IMS, that is IMS Managed ACB and IMS Catalog. So if you are related to IMS by now, for sure you might have heard about IMS Catalog. We are hearing that for last 10 years, and we are hearing about Managed ACB for last 5 years. And we all know that by summers of 2025, which is just a couple of months away, IMS managed ACB is going to be mandatory. So with the next release of IMS, that is going to be IMS 15.6, the only option is to enable IMS managed ACB, that your ACB lives are all going away. Okay. So this is going to be the agenda for today's session. I know that today's session is 45 minutes only, but we'll try to start off with the history and background, and then we'll progress further. So we'll talk about the introduction to IMS catalog. We'll talk about the introduction to IMS directory, how the life will look like, once you are converted to IMS managed ACBs, and why we are doing IMS managed ACB, right? To eventually get the advantage of DDL. So how it will look like when you transition to DDL, and eventually one day in future when everything is transitioned to DDL, when DDL is mandatory, how the life will look like and how the utilities are impacted, different vendor utilities or applications are impacted by catalog and managed ACB. So that's going to be a short and sweet agenda, but I think it's important to cover this thing, which is, coming very fast in IMS, as you all know. Okay, let me move on to the next slide. So let me start with some history, why IMS catalog came into existence. So IMS catalog came into existence sometime in 2012. So it's more than 10 years now. And, one day in a room full of IBM experts, they were chatting and they're discussing the customer concerns or feedback that they have got from some major customers, that how to simplify the management of IMS, right? So they came up with a concept of something called as IMS catalog. So we all know that when we define any database or application or transaction to IMS, especially application in terms of PSB and database definition in terms of DBD, we code assembler macros in the DBD source and PSB source, right? And you might have noticed that if you have ever seen any DBD source, you only code some of the important fields. So just for simplicity, let me take an example. Let's consider a bank database which consists of 3 segments. So you can always correlate it. If you're not much familiar with the IMS contracts, you can always correlate it with the relational constructs, right? So when I say database, again, it is a database on the DB2 side as well. When I say segments on IMS, you can correlate it with the tables on the DB2 or relational side of the house. So let's consider a database, a bank database, which consists of 3 tables to start off with. One is the customer table, which has the customer information. One is the card table, and maybe account table or account segment. So when you define this customer segment or a table in the DBD source, you will only define some of the important fields, like maybe the primary key or the unique key, we call it in IMS, right? That is your customer ID, customer first name, customer last name, customer contact detail. So maybe your entire segment, customer segment is of 500 bytes, but you only define 150 bytes in the DBD source, which is known to IMS. The rest of the information is just some data which is not known to IMS. And most of the time that data is, if you're writing a COBOL application program, that data is in COBOL copybook. If you're writing a PL1, that's in the PL1 copybook constructs. If you're writing a Java program, it might be in some Java classes. So all that information is basically dispersed in different platform, and it's not centralized. And that makes management of that metadata very difficult from an IMS standpoint. And that's why that set of architects from IBM, they came up with a concept of something called as IMS catalog. And very interestingly, they chose IMS catalog to host the metadata, which is IMS database itself. So we'll talk about the IMS catalog database in a minute. So that is the history to make the management of your, IMS easier. They came up with concept of catalog and enable you to manage everything at a single central point of repository. That's the whole concept of, IMS catalog. So about IMS catalog, as I mentioned that this is an optional database. At least it was optional when it was introduced in IMS 12, I think around 2012 timeline. And later on, obviously, it becomes more evident. So as I mentioned that catalog is implemented as IMS database itself. So catalog is basically storing the IMS metadata, which is not the actual customer data, but data about your database definitions, your transactions, your applications, and things of that nature. We call it as metadata or data about data, right? So IBM implemented this as an LDB PHIDAM OSAM database. And interestingly, I was sitting in one of the IBM conference and I asked them a question. It might be, I think, 5 or 6 years back, why they chose LDB PHIDAM OSAM for an IMS catalog database. And I got an interesting answer from an IBM expert that first thing is they want to make it extremely fast. So when you say fast, we know that there is a special kind of database called as FastPath database or data entry databases, right? But they still implemented this as an LDB PHIDAM OSAM. One of the primary reason is not all the customers worldwide who are using IMS, they have FastPath databases. So generally they don't have the utilities to maintain FastPath database. Majority of the banks, if they are using IMS DB, they have utilities to maintain IMS full function or LDB database, and that's why they implemented this as a full function LDB database. Another reason is FastPath does not support DLI batch. It's an online only database, right? But LDB or full function supports DLI batch, that you can take your IMS offline and still do the some maintenance activity or some kind of update activity on your catalog database. That's one of the primary reason. And you can easily correlate IMS catalog with the DB2 catalog. So the whole idea here is to make it simplified and then align it with the DB2 database administration work. Because these days we know the concept of universal DBAs. One DBA is expected to take care of both DB2 and IMS databases. So the whole idea is to simplify it and make it more similar or aligned with the DB2 operations and still enjoy the advantage of the speed and the accuracy of IMS database. So that's why this concept came into existence. And one thing which IBM has learned from the past, if you talk about DB2 catalog, that is version dependent. With every new version of DB2, you need to upgrade your DB2 catalog. But same is not true with IMS catalog. Your IMS catalog is version independent. Even if you are upgrading your IMS versions, you don't need to upgrade your IMS catalog as such. So this is one advantage. And probably if you look back at the history of last 50 years from an IMS standpoint, this is probably second or third biggest change in history ever. The first thing was I think the logging capability that came into IMS version 203, and then the support for DASD and those media manager program to make it extremely fast. And I think manage the CB is probably third biggest change in the history of IMS. And we all need to embrace that as an IMS community, as customers, as vendors, as IBM. I think we are moving in right direction because IMS has been working fantastically well in last 50 years. But we need to ensure that it works that way and serve the purpose for next 50 to 100 years or for decades. So yeah, that's why IMS catalog came into existence and followed up by IMS managed DCB. So in a minute, we'll talk about IMS managed DCB. So as I mentioned, this is a trusted online source for IMS database and application metadata information. Since this is an IMS database, you can do a traditional DLI calls, and there is a special call which has been provided with the IMS catalog, the DL one call that we call as GER call, and that returns the response in the XML format, which you can parse and process it further. One more important point is IMS catalog supports multiple versions. What that means is for the same database or same metadata, you could have two versions. Let's say you are implementing some change and you did run the DDL that has created an entry in IMS catalog. But let's say you're not satisfied, you want to make some change. In that case, you will again tweak your DDL statement, generate it, and then it will populate a new entry in the IMS catalog. That will invalidate the last entry, and only the new entry will be referred. And then there is something called as catalog purge utility, which you can use to purge the older entries. So that's the concept of multiple versions. There is also a concept of database versioning, but that's a different concept than the metadata versions. So when I say metadata, what kind of metadata we are talking about? So it's basically technical metadata, right? So as I mentioned, this is hosted in a HealthDB, PHIDEM, OSM database. So when you talk about from a database standpoint, your PSB and DBD resources, your database structure definitions, your physical database definitions, your segment definition, your field definition, whatever you code in DBD and PSB source using those assembler macros, that's your metadata, that's your data about the data. And when you talk about applications, the data type, application defined fields, your redefines in the COBOL, encodings, some user defined types and structure, all that constitutes an application metadata. And interestingly, one more thing, when you talk about catalog and IMS managed DCB is the uh, probably the DRD functionality, dynamic resource definition. Because one more important component of IMS, when let's say you're defining a new database or application or transaction, you code these DBD and PSB source. But another thing is you need to make an entry into the IMS sysgen macros, right? In the stage one, stage two. And that basically goes into your mod blocks. And when you start IMS, IMS is referring to that the existence of database application and transaction from the mod block. So IBM later on came up with the concept of something called as DRD, which basically eliminates mod blocks and allow you to dynamically define the entries at the IMS level. And one of the implementation of DRD is VSAM repository. So again, um, it houses that kind of information. That's not directly related to catalog and manage DCB. You could still have managed DCBs and using mod blocks. That's totally acceptable configuration. So you might have seen this picture, which is basically your catalog database. So this is a hierarchical HealthDB, PHIDEM, OSAM database. So you have a root segment, you have a dependent segment, and so on and so forth. And you can see that for the DBD, the left hand hierarchy is housing all those macros basically which you define on the DBD source side. And on the right hand side hierarchy, you can see that it basically consists of all those macros which you generally define on the PSB side. And one more interesting thing is you can see that there are four dataset groups, DAGs in this. This is a LDB database. So you have four dataset groups, that is DSG A, B, C, and D. And interestingly enough, they are color coded here for some reason. So the first one is white, and second one is gray, third one is green, and fourth one is purple. So the reason they are color coded is all those segments which are expected to be accessed most frequently, they are in that white dataset group DSG. Then all those segments which are expected to be accessed second most, they are part of the DSG2. And all those segments which are expected to be accessed third most, they are part of the DSGC, and so on and so forth. So that's why they are color coded this way. And you might notice that there are two more important things to note here. There is something called as DVD vend segment type and PSB vend segment type. Because a lot of vendors, including BMC, they have some vendor specific macros in the DBD source and PSB source. So basically that is a provision to vendors and also sometime to customers. I have seen some customers who have their homegrown macros, which are part of DBD source and PSB source. So that is to provide them the mechanism to store the metadata in this segment. And eventually, when you move this into directory, which is an ACB live equivalent, that information goes into directory as well. And one more thing is you can see that there is a second index associated with this HealthDB as well. And generally, the secondary index is housing the correlationship between your DBDs and PSBs. We know that for a single DBD, there might be multiple PSBs, which is referencing that database. So all that correlation and mapping is basically established and stored in the secondary index database, which you can access again using those GUR calls and so on and so forth. So what is IMS managed DCB? We have talked about catalog, we have talked about directory, and eventually some in IMS 14, there was a concept called as IMS managed DCB or directories, which got introduced. I think it became GA sometime in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And from that point onwards, you can optionally enable IMS managed DCB. And catalog is a prerequisite for IMS managed DCB, because if you have to enable IMS managed DCB, you should be first have a catalog. So that's a mandatory requirement for IMS managed DCB. Although from IMS 15.6, which is expected in next couple of months, the IMS managed DCB or directory will be a requirement. Your IMS basically won't come up if you don't have a catalog and directory setup. If you're not ready, probably you have to still run at IMS 15 or less for some time. And that's why I think it is highly recommended and it's high time that you start moving into catalog and manage DCB direction. We already know that a lot of customers, they are already running catalog, I think for some years with a lot of success. But we have a lot of examples where few customers are running managed DCB in production for several months now without any major disturbance. So yeah, that's the future, and I think everybody needs to embrace that. So yeah, as I mentioned that the ACBs in the past, when the your ACBs were managed by user, so that was non-managed ACB environment. In the future, your ACBs will be managed by IMS itself, and that will be managed ACB environment. And when you look at it, ACB directory dataset or IMS directories are just an extension of ACB. The only difference is ACB libraries were used to be PDS datasets, whereas directory datasets are PDSEs. So obviously, we know that there are operational benefits of using PDSEs over PDS. So that's the advantage of moving to PDS and having the same metadata. So if let's say you have a DBD, again the same bank database, and you have a DBD information in the ACB live, and you have the DBD information in directory. And if you open two of them and just toggle between two screens, you will see them that they are exactly same. exactly same format, exactly same content, everything is same. So first information is going into the catalog, which is stored in a segment format, and then from there it is going into directory, and it is exactly matching with how it used to store in ACB Live. So for IMS, from an IMS standpoint, for utilities, for customer applications, if they are referencing IMS data, the only thing that is changed is the source of the information. In the past, it was in ACB Live. Now it is in directory. But once it is read, the information is in the same format. So the parsing logic and all other things remains the same. And if you have to enable your IMS managed ACB, you basically have to make changes in this member DF, STF, XXX, and you have to say ACB management equals to catalog. So by default, that will be the only option in IMS 15.6. Okay, I will pause here just in case if anybody has any question. If not, you can always continue.
I guess, could it be worth saying that if you don't go to 15.6, so you'll have to delay, you basically, that is the requirement. So from June, it is, if you want to upgrade to 15.6, you have to have the ACB managed ACBs. Yeah. So
that's right now.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, but obviously, if you talk to any IBM experts, the recommendation is to, if you have not started thinking around it, at least start thinking and start your journey now rather than later. So because 15.5 will only be supported until at some point in future, right? So once it
Yeah.
is out of support, you'll be forced to go into IMS 15.6.
Yes,
Okay.
that's a really good point.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, that directory has a functionality very much like ACB Live. And if you open two members, one in ACB Live and one in directory, they look almost identical. And your directory is kept in sync with the catalog. So in the past, when you have a non-managed ACB environment, there was no catalog, right? Everything was in ACB Live. But in managed ACB, you have directory, which is an equivalent of ACB Live, but you have a catalog also. So your catalog has to be in sync with your directory because eventually catalog information is going into directory when you are either running a catalog populate or you're running your DDLs, which is populating your catalog as well as directory. And then there is a special data set in managed ACB that is called as BSDS dataset, bootstrap dataset, which basically has the information about the directory dataset. So when you talk about directory dataset, there are two types of directory dataset. One is an active directory and one is a staging directory. And staging directory is only one dataset, but active directory is a multiple datasets, uh, uh, multiple datasets itself. So if you correlate it with the non-managed ACB environment or ACB Live environment, there used to be a concept of, OLC stat or mod stat. That is basically at runtime telling you which ACB Live is active. So obviously on the ACB Live, there were two ACB Lives, right? ACB Live A and ACB Live B. And at any given point in time, only one library will be active, either ACB Live A or B. So similarly, from an IMS standpoint, you have this, from an IMS managed DCB standpoint, you have this BSDS that is keeping track of, okay, what is staging directory, what are your active directory, and what is your, current version which is being used at the moment. So IBM provides an API called as catalog API that is DFS3 catq to read the information from directory datasets. And basically, you need to pass the high-level qualifier of your bootstrap dataset. And from there, it reads, okay, which are the active directories. It will do the concatenation and read the information from the active directory or staging directory based on what parameter you have supplied to that API. So as I mentioned that IMS catalog, yep, there's a question.
Say that the catalog in sync, is it the most recent copy of the metadata in the catalog?
Because I think your voice is breaking, so I'm not totally sure what is your question.
Yeah, let me write it down, the question. One second.
Okay.
And you can continue. I'll write it down, the question.
Yeah, I'll come back to your question later
Yeah.
on. Okay, no problem. Okay, so as I mentioned that IMS catalog is a database, right? It is implemented as catalog, LDB, PHIDIM, OSAM. So we need to give all the care and attention that we give to any other database, which is a critical database. And since this is a system database, because everything is dependent now on this database, so we need to give extra care to this database. We need to ensure that we are performing all the routine management and maintenance on the catalog database. We are taking, regular image copies. We are running pointer checkers to make sure everything is intact. We are running reorg to reclaim your fragmented space. So we need to basically do all that we do for our regular IMS database, plus more, because this is a system database and everything is dependent on that. So we need to ensure that we are aligned with our DR strategy, because this is a database and there could be a DR situation. So we need to, update our backup and recovery procedures to ensure that we can recover our catalog database from any kind of failure or disaster. Okay, so this is one example where this is a single IMS with a catalog and managed ACB. So as you can say that this is an IMS where it is connected with multiple databases, and you have an ACB live, which is basically constructed from PSB live and DBD live. So what happens? So you basically runs catalog populate that will populate the information into the IMS catalog database here. So you ran the catalog populate from ACB Live, the information is going into the catalog database. And then you are populating the staging directory. So information is going from catalog database into the staging directory. And then from staging directory, you might be testing your changes. So let's say you're implementing a sizing change or adding a new segment or a table to your database. In that case, you might be testing the changes where you are reading the new information from staging and old information from Active Directory. But once your change is good, you are good to go ahead. You have to import those changes into the IMS, right? So for that, you can use an import command, which is a type 2 command that will populate the control blocks, move the control blocks from staging to directory, and it will also refresh in the IMS environment. So that's how it is expected to work. And obviously, this is a simple configuration. In the real world situation, there might be multiple IMS systems, and those IMS systems might be using one catalog or one set of directories. It might be using multiple catalogs or multiple set of directories. So those complexities needs to be managed. And I think it's more of a transition that every customer or IMS shop has to adopt, because for some time I'm pretty sure there will be a transition period. Not everything on day one will be DDL. DDL is again a thing of future, so we'll talk about DDL in some detail in next few slides. So yeah, let's say you completed your migration. You implemented IMS catalog, you implemented IMS managed DCBs, that is directories. So how your day one will look like? So you need to ask yourself how your maintenance procedures will change. So you need to ask that question, I think probably before the migration itself, because once the migration is complete and you immediately need to do some maintenance, it might be too late. So, but your maintenance procedures should be updated with your managed DCB migration. For some time, continue using the gen process. So let's say you have to make a DBD change, adding a new segment. Still do a change in the DBD source, do the DBD gen, do the ACB gen, and then use the catalog populate to populate that entry to the catalog and staging directory, and then eventually use import once those changes are needs to be activated in IMS to move the changes into Active Directory or Active Directory and IMS. Similarly, you can use some of the vendor products like BMC, AMI Change Manager for IMS TM, formerly known as Delta. But we are going through this all the efforts of implementing IMS catalog and managed ACBs. One advantage we obviously understood is your directories are PDACs compared to PDS. There are operational advantages, like it can dynamically add members on the fly. But that's not the only advantage why we are going to manage DCB. The main advantage is DDL. So instead of making changes in DBD source, you will be writing DDL statements in the future, right? You will write for new databases, you will do create table space. For new segments, you will do create table. For new PSBs, you will do create program view. So that's the future, right? So you need to start testing it today. Once you are implemented, once you are migrated to catalog and manage the CB, that is only the half job, half done. The half is still left, right? Because to exploit the advantage of managed ACB, you need to embrace DDL. So start testing DDL once you completed your migration, and then uh, IBM came up with a very good utility called ZDDL, which is a good tool to start testing your DDL stuff. That does not require ODBM and IMS connect address space, and you can simply code up the DDLs and start testing it. There are a lot of utilities, including vendor utilities from BMC, which can give you an equivalent of, okay, if your old DBD source or PHB source look like this, how the DDL equivalent will look like, and vice versa. If you want to convert from DDL to original DBD source and PHB source, you can always do that and compare. So start testing, start embracing DDL. And then obviously, since this is a major change in the history of IMS, there will always be some of the other problems which are, there are some known problems, there are some unknown problems, right? So those things will be there, but we need to see how we can get behind that. So there will be some maturity time that there will be there always. So how your life will look like until you transition to DDL. So as I've already mentioned, you will still make the changes to DBD source, do the ACB gen, populate it in ACB live, then run the catalog populate it into the catalog and staging directory. Other way around in future, or even if you are transitioning to DDL, for some changes, you can start using DDL. And for some changes, you can continue to use ACB gen process. So we can say that for some period of time, we call it a transition period. It will be done in the mix mode. Like for some, it will be traditional gen, and for some changes, it will be a DDL. And DDL will again put the information into the catalog and staging directory. And once the information is in the staging directory, you test your changes. Once you are satisfied, now it's time to activate it. So you will run the import command that will move your changes from staging directory to active directory, and eventually refresh in the IMS control region. In case of in place of import, you can also use BMC Delta products to activate the changes in the IMS control region. But at some point, when you complete the transition and DDL is the only option, in that case, this portion is going to go away. So now the only option left is to run the DDL. If you have to make changes in DVD, if you have to make changes in PSB, you have to run the DDL. And you have to commit your changes into the catalog, and that will populate it into the staging directory. You have to test your changes, and you have to eventually import it into the active directory in IMS control region. But for some time, I think this left portion will be there when we have to run in the mix mode, and eventually at some point in future, I don't know that date when that will happen. But your gen processes, your DB live, your PSB live, your ACB live, and your traditional gen processes is going to go away. And DDL is going to be the only option for making any kind of changes. Okay, so we talked about catalog, we talked about managed ACB, we talked about migration, we talked about how our life will look like for some time when we are still embracing the DDL. But what about some of the other things like vendor utilities or some applications which needs to access the metadata, because most of the time it is IMS which is accessing the metadata, right? But what are the other players who are accessing the metadata? Vendor utilities, or maybe your application programs needs to access the metadata for some reason. So in that case, uh, there are mainly two things. One is if you are running purely in online mode, for that, when IMS comes up, it reads the DF, STF, XXX member to determine if it's a catalog and managed ACB, right? And then it builds a control block called DF S3ACH. So this is a catalog anchor block, which is nothing but a DSect or a copybook. It's a piece of information, right, which has some layout. It has everything. It has high level qualifier of BSDS. It has the information about your staging directory. It has information about your active directory. It has information about the actual catalog database name. It has information about your catalog alias. So let's say you are having 4 IMS, each of them are having 4 different catalogs. So in that case, you will not use the default catalog alias, that is DFSC. You might have a different catalogs. Probably your IMS ID is your IMS catalog alias. So all that information is part of this control blocks. So if you know the way to access this control block, all that information is readily available. But generally, from a customer standpoint, they might not have access to that control block. So it's more of a batch kind of environment. So in that case, what you can do is there is an exit called DFS3CDX. So that's an assembler exit. And this is the exact representation of whatever information you can code on the DFSDF member, which is the member in your proc live, which contains the information about your catalog, whether your catalog managed ACB and what's your catalog alias name. So you can call that exit and that exit can give you the information. The biggest advantage of using the exit is with exit, you don't need to make any JCL changes. You just populate that exit in your step live concatenation, and this exit will be called and it will give you the information about catalog environment, managed ACB environment, your BSDS, and all those things. But let's say if you are not comfortable with that, the other option to make a determination about catalog and manage the ACB is to directly read the proclive member itself, that is DFS, DFXX member. And if let's say you get the catalog alias name, and then the actual catalog high level qualifier is in the MD live. So there is a MD live member which you can refer to get the actual high level qualifier of your catalog and directory datasets. And then also, since this is an LDB database, catalog is an LDB database, right? So this generally, I think, although there is an exception that you can still choose not to register in the recon, but I think it's a high chances that since it's a database, so you would like to make sure it's registered in recons. And from recon, you can get the high level qualifier of your BSTS, which is all the information. So yeah, a lot of customers I've interacted with them, they need to access the metadata, but for that they need to do the determination, whether it's a catalog environment, managed ACB, what's the catalog alias name, what's the high level qualifier, what are the directories data sets, and then they call that API to read the metadata. So obviously, once you determine, so first step is the determination, and then second step is the actual reading the metadata. So once you are determining that, okay, it's a managed DCB environment. If it's not, then it's a traditional read from DBD Live or ACB Live. You could have a read macro or whatever way you read in your application program. But if it's a directory, IBM has provided this API called DFS3CatQ API, which reads the metadata from directory, which is nothing but a PDAC. So since your source is changing and there is a mechanism change also, so IBM provided this API to, relatively make it easier for customers and vendors to read the metadata. And IMS itself is using this API to read the information from directory. Okay, so this is managed ACB white paper. that we published recently, and I got an opportunity to work on it. Let me quickly open it. This is how the white paper looks like. I have attached the copy of the white paper in the presentation itself. It is very generic stuff. We are not talking about BMC utilities. It's all about managed DCB in general, how things are. So we are talking about introduction. When you're transitioning to IMS managed DCB, what's your strategic approach? And then we have talked about 3 use cases. So let's say if you're a database administrator, so how this managed DCB is going to streamline the metadata management for database administrator. If you are an application developer, how it will help you in accelerating your application deployments. And if you are an operational person or a sysprog, how this is going to help you. And then we have an interesting frequently asked questions, which we have compiled and provided the answers to all those questions. And in the end, it's a conclusion. So I've attached this white paper. You can go through this white paper at your time, which is comfortable. But a lot of good information has been covered in this. We have been sharing this on the BMC and some of the other forums like LinkedIn and other forums that we use. One important thing that I would like to mention is, so if you go through this frequently asked questions, some of these questions are very well articulated by some of our customers who are embracing catalog and manage DCB. Some of them are generic, some of them are related to our utility. So you can choose to go through it in your spare time. But one important thing I would like to highlight is this. So last year, what we did is at BMC, we started a series of webinars on catalog and manage DCB. And we did almost, I think it was 6 sessions that we did in total, where we talked about IMS manage DCB, its impact, its transition, migration, and automation tools that we have available. So all these in blogs and recordings are available on YouTube. And if you just click on this link, it will take you to the community and it will take you to YouTube channel, BMC YouTube channel, where all the information is readily available. And all these things are discussed in detail there with examples. I think that is a very handy resource if you want to educate yourself more on IMS catalog and manage DCB. And probably if you're using BMC utilities, that's going to help further. And so, yeah, I have also given the link here. So all those webinar series, you directly go to this BMC community blog, where you'll find all the recordings stored there. I just wanted to mention that there is an important tech talk, which is coming up from BMC. We call it as BMC AME Tech Talk, where we'll be talking about, some of the more details and nitty-gritties of IMS managed DCB. So that's coming up on 21st of May. It's 10 a.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. BST, and 8:30 p.m. India time. It's a 60-minute session. So myself, Gary Turner, he's a solution engineer in BMC, and Subhashish, he's a product manager. So we'll be talking about that, some of the interesting details, which is not covered in this session today. Today was more generic overview, why IBM came up with catalog and manage DCB, and why it's important to embrace this change for the next generation of IMS. So yeah, if you are interested, you can go onto this link, register for it, and attend it, which is coming up in next few weeks. So yeah, I think we are almost at the end. So Dom, I think I've tried to do a good job of keeping it under 45 minutes. So we are exactly at 45 minutes now. We can open it up for any questions.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Anshul. Thanks for keeping it within time. That was a good presentation. So yes, just everybody, if you got feedback, then this is session AC. You can use the QR code there. If you just put your phone against the QR code there, you should be able to scan that and and then you can also get feedback I think you can log on again and do feedback that way. So it doesn't have to be done via this QR code. So we just had the Vikash was asking in the chat earlier regarding, he says that for the catalog in sync, does that mean the most recent copy of the metadata in the IMS catalog? And then
Yes,
it's just
sir.
clarifying also, does that match the active ACB library member that any application
Yeah.
programs are currently using?
Yeah.
I guess it
So
depends
yeah,
on,
yeah, I can try, Dom,
yeah.
what I know.
Maybe we could pull back one of the slides as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe I think this is a good slide. So as I mentioned, let's say you have a database. Let's take the same database, your bank database, which is customer accounts and payments table or segment. And you want to add a new segment, let's say cards segment to the existing database. So you will do a DBD source change, right? You will do the DBD change. You might make changes to PSB or create new PSB. You will do the PSB gen. You will do the ACB gen, right? And then you will use catalog populate. So I'm talking about when you are not using DDL, still current way. So once you have the data in the ACB live, the new structure, which has that fourth segment also. So you will do a catalog populate, and that will populate your catalog as well as your staging directory. And there is a timestamp in the catalog, which is known as pending timestamp, which means that that resource is pending for activation from an IMS standpoint. So that entry is not activated in IMS. IMS, the online IMS system is not referring to that pending activity. For an IMS standpoint, it's that change is pending for activation. So it is still referring to that last entry, which was already active in IMS system. And uh, so this is identically matching. So your pending entry in the catalog, that's the same information is going into the staging directory. So in directory, you only have one entry, although in catalog, you could have multiple entries. As I've talked about, there could be multiple versions of the catalog, but that will each time that will override what's there in the staging directory. So let's say you added 4 segment, it created an entry in the catalog with the pending timestamp as well as your staging directory. You are not happy, you made more changes to your DBD source and you run the catalog populate again. So that will create a entry number 2 for that, right? But it will overwrite what's there in the staging directory. So now you have something in the staging directory, you have something in the catalog with a pending timestamp. And when you import it eventually with the type to import command or using BMC Delta products, that will what that will do, that will change the timestamp from pending for import to the active timestamp in the catalog. And it will copy your information from staging directory and replace what's there in the active directory. And it will also refresh the information from active directory into the IMS storage, which is what IMS is referring to and all the BMPs, IFPs, and your applications are referring to. So that's how it works. So in staging directory, you always have one member, but from an IMS standpoint, you are always referring to one active copy. All other copies are either pending or pending for activation. So that's how IMS works. I hope that answers your question, because
Yeah,
okay.
and I guess you touched on it before, but you can define the number of versions that you keep when you set up the catalog. So it can
Right.
be what 2 or 3 versions, or even more, if you really need to.
Yeah. So there are two concepts, Dom. One is database versioning. So since catalog LDB is database, you could have 2 or 3 versions. Then the versions of metadata is like multiple entries in the same catalog database. So let's say over a period of time, you have a lot of invalid entries in the catalog, which are just your test entries, which you never activated. So IBM provided something called as catalog purge utility to purge those entries easily out of the IMS catalog database. So with some maintenance, those entries will be, taken off of the system.
Get you. And I think we've got a final question from Vikash here, who's just posted again. He said, with regard to tasks such as catalog updates, backups, recovery, can those be automated to reduce manual effort? So I guess he's talking about the catalog maintenance.
Yeah. So I think it is true for any IMS database, right? So generally, most of the shops, they have some automated procedures to take backups, to take image copies, maybe concurrent image copies or batch image copies, whatever suits their environment at a regular period of time. And then, they need to ensure that whatever recovery procedures they have or the DR procedures they have, they are updated with the procedures to recover your catalog database. Most of the things will remain same with a few tweaks here and there, because you need to ensure that this is your most critical database. You need to have the mechanism in place. IMS by default does not provide any automation to do these activities on its own, but maybe in future it can do that. But some of the vendor products like BMC has catalog manager. It provides some offerings which automate some of these activities. It will create a JCL for you. Let's say I've talked about catalog purge, right? How will you keep track of the timestamp when those entries were added? Because when you run the catalog purge, you need to give a timestamp. So you can use BMC AME catalog manager, which makes your life easier. And there might be other tools from other vendors and IBM.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So in the instance of time, just to just say we're over by a few minutes now, so I think we'll wrap up if that's all right. But yeah, we've got this BMC link here for another session on May the 21st, so you might want to register for that. That should be really good. Thanks for promoting that, Anshul. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. And there's plenty more sessions. We've got a couple more today, so if you can look to attend those, interested in those, then please do so. So with that, I'll wrap up. Appreciated. Thanks for your time today. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
Cheers.